My name is Pearl Coleman. I've lived a good portion of my life in Stafford County, the younger portion of my life, of the White Oak area. Um, my mom is a Stafford native. My dad is originally from Spotsylvania, somewhere around Louisa, Virginia, Madison County. Um, but me and my three brothers lived with my grandparents in Stafford County. I would say from the time I was maybe 5 years old until 10 years old. Um, we lived with my grandparents, Mary Boxley and Willie Boxley, and they had a great big farm that they raised everything. My grandfather was, he was such a hard-working man. He would work from sun up until sometimes after dark each day. He would plant anything from corn, fields, just acres of corn. He planted potatoes, all kinds of beans, potatoes, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, um, a little bit of everything. And that was the way of life for him. That was his livelihood. He would grow all these vegetables and then take them to market into Fredericksburg. And I would assume that he would take these things to market over off of William Street, where the marketplace still is today. Um, the only time I remember him ever resting from working is on rainy days. On those days, he would sit at the kitchen window and look out over the fields with a great smile on his face and just be so thankful for the rain on his crop, because he knew when it rained that his crop was going to be um, prosperous. Um, they had a big farm. He had a horse and a mule, which allowed him to plow the lands. He had the handheld plow that he walked behind these animals to plow up his land. Um, he had the hens, the rooster, the chickens, the hogs, the cows, and all of these things they used to eat from. My grandmother would milk the cows, and she would make her own butter. Um, and it was amazing. They didn't have electricity, so that there was a refrigerator to store anything to keep it from spoiling. But I remember my grandmother would go down the hill from the house. The house sat on the hill, and the house is still sitting there, even though right now it's in great disrepair. But at the top of the hill was the house, and at the bottom of the hill, a steep hill, there was a spring. And the spring was just beautifully cold, refreshing water. And this is where she would store her butter in a jar, a tight jar. She would put it in the water to keep it fresh. Um, they were very hard-working people. She worked as hard as my grandfather did. Um, they had 10 children, 5 girls and 5 boys, and my mother was one of those girls. And of course, that had to be a great job when they were trying to make a living with the farm, raising 10 children. Um, but of course, by the time me and my brothers came along, and I had 3 brothers behind me, by the time we came along, all their children had, left home pretty much. And so me and my 3 brothers had our grandparents to ourselves. And of course, they were hard workers, like I said, during the day. And we would all leave the house and go up the road, which is where my cousins lived. My uncle up the road had 8 children. And 7 of those were boys, and they had 1 girl. And we would all just gallivant up and down the roads and through the woods. And there was a creek, or there still is a creek, down past my grandparents' house, and we would go down there and swim in the water. Of course, I was afraid of the water back then, so I pretty much would just walk in it, and that was about it. But we had access to the whole area back then. But at this point, at this day and time, there are a lot of new homes that have been built in the area, and I could never imagine back then that this would actually be the case this day and time, where you would have many different families living in the area. But back then, when I was growing up there, we had the whole area to ourselves, and it was just beautiful. And that was down Route 712. It's Route 712 now, but back then we had a Route 2 box number, so it was like Route 2, a Route 2 address. But it's called Wood Landing Road at this point, which is still Route 712. We didn't ever have to worry about eating during the day. You know, my grandparents were hard workers. Of course, if we wanted to go home and eat, we could, but the natural stuff was there. You know, there were blackberries all along the roadside. There were pear trees, apple trees, peach trees. Even on my grandparents' property, there was a cherry tree. Of course, you had to get up real high somehow to get to the cherries, and but the land was just very plentiful, and we enjoyed all of those things. We even would suck the juice from the honeysuckle plant. Such a beautiful flavor. And I've been noticing recently that the honeysuckles are blooming now, and the smell is just so beautiful, and it takes me back to my childhood in Stafford County. I live in Caroline County right now, but even in Caroline, there's honeysuckles that are growing, and it's just a beautiful, sweet smell, and just brings back beautiful memories. Yeah, my grandmother, her name is Sally Cully, maiden name Sally White. I don't remember a lot about her, because what I remember about her is that she was very ill, as I remember her. I remember my grandmother, Mary Boxley, would leave home each morning and go up to care for her, because my grandmother's home place was just up the road from where she lived. And she would go there every morning while my great-grandmother was ill and care for her. But I do understand, my mom would always tell me that her grandmother was a great midwife in the area, and that she delivered babies for whites as well as blacks. And I just recently learned that she delivered babies for one of my aunts, the one that had 8 kids. She delivered all those kids except the 2 youngest ones. And I would imagine she probably delivered a lot of family members' children, as well as for the whites. And I say whites now because that's how we identified each other back when I was younger. I was born in 1949, and so I came up in the 50s and the 60s. And it was always whites and blacks, or whites and coloreds is what it was. And I remember seeing the signs, whites only, coloreds only, you know. But it didn't really have much of an impact on me because I was so young. Didn't really understand much about it until I was much older. But yes, I've gotten some stories about my great-grandmother, that she was a great midwife.